What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership in the spotlight. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the Prime Minister. We'll certainly welcome any manifesto leaks here. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from the consequences of the global economy due to tensions between the US and China, to the latest gubernatorial results from North Carolina, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Mike Morris, Chairman of GQA Qualifications. Mike has over 25 years' experience in senior management roles within further education and has brought that to the fore at GQA. The company itself was incorporated in 2002 in Sheffield. Their mission of quality through qualifications has gained traction, and with an ambitious and exciting plan for the future, they aim to reshape the sector. Let's find out more now. Mike, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you very much, Mike, for joining us today. There's a lot to get through, I know, but I thought it would be a good place to start. It's been a few months since GQA obviously has been in the review. I think the listeners would love to know what you and the team have been up to since.
Well, we've had quite a busy summer. I suppose at board level, we've focused our minds on our strategic review, which we carry out every 5 years, and it's been instrumental in our success, really. So a bit more about that later, perhaps. But that's focused our minds a bit and made us consider our position and work out where we're going in the future and what we need to do. Look at the priorities. So we're just about coming to the end of that now. So.
And it's certainly, I think, something we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later, but it's certainly a process, no matter what company you're in or sector you're in, that very much focuses the mind on not only where you've been, but where you're going to go.
Exactly. I mean, GQA, when it was set up by the glass sector, it just sort of picked up the role of awarding body because it had to separate from the sort of the national training function of GTL as it was. And we've had a sort of organic growth since then. We've just really responded to what industries wanted and just developed qualifications along those lines and that sort of thing. But now we're established and we're still consolidated our position, we're able to do a bit more and put a bit more back into the sector. So that's what we're doing now. We've set up a big initiative called Building Our Skills. And that's it's not meant to be led by us. We sort of primed it. We're working with a marketing partner called Inside the Box, and they and ourselves have developed this sort of brand that we're going to widen out. And it's with a lot of support from industry, from the big companies and some smaller ones. And it's really to develop resources for schools, colleges, for training providers, try and make fenestration, which is glass and glaze and all that sort of stuff, an exciting, interesting career. We do, like other areas, suffer from skill shortages, and it's great if we can get good people coming in and wanting to work with us. So building our skills is one of the tools we've developed to try and do that.
And it's very much an exciting time, I should stress to everybody, for GQA. And we'll get to the ins and outs of that scheme later as well, because there's lots to talk about. But I thought as well, for a lot of people might not know, indeed, that GQA now was founded 17 years ago. And it might be a good place, perhaps, to kick things off on that front. Mike, with perhaps just letting listeners know how did it come about and what were its ambitions in 2002?
Well, they're very different. We started off in the late 90s, actually, as a division of GTL. And the government at the time decided to separate the functions in sort of the lead bodies in the country from awarding bodies and sort of sector skills councils and that sort of thing. So we were separated out, and we had a real separate split, and we became a limited company in our own right with a separate board. And on the board were senior people from different parts of the sector, from ceramics, from refractory, from glass, glazing. A whole range of different people are on it, including national players like the GGF, Glass and Glazing Federation, and Fencer and people like that. But then a variety of things happened, and I was on the board because I worked at St Helens College, which was a massive glass town at the time, and I ended up being the only independent on the board. So they made me chairman, and that was like almost 20 years ago now. So it's I've carried that role on because I believe in the industry and I wanted to succeed. So we've had the board's changed over the years, but we started off quite poor, really. We had a £40,000 loan from the glass training and to set us up, but we paid that back. We made it our mission, and really the first sort of 5 or 10 years were just survival, trying to keep our heads above water, because a lot of changes came in that time. I mean, we were at the forefront of developing MVQs and national occupational standards and that sort of thing, and then a whole range of will be aware of the changes that happened in the skills sector since then. The demise of the SSCs and the standard setting bodies, the demise of UKCS, the sort of overarching skills body. So there's a whole range of different things have happened, introduction to trailblazer apprenticeships. So we've had to respond to all of these. But from that £40,000 loan, in 2018-19, we had our best year ever, where we had a turnover around about £1 million. And this year we're set to double that. So we are really sort of going places. But our mission isn't about making money, because there's no shareholders. Nice. Our board of directors are all volunteers. Any surpluses we may go back into the industry, either in reduced registration costs or into initiatives like building our skills or in standard setting operations and things like that. So we actually put everything back into the sector that we earn. So it's quite a good model for other industries to follow, I would suggest.
Without a doubt. And I think we shouldn't, I know you've spoken about them, but it's hard to stress enough. Sort of the early difficulties, of course, you did have, from going from on a day-to-day basis worrying about cash flow to where GQA are now, qualifications delivered through over 80 centres nationally. The market, employers and employees have responded exceptionally positively to your programme, really, haven't they?
Yeah, we offer a range of different sort of products and services. I mean, our core has always been NVQs and SVQs in Scotland. But we offer, NVQs are sort of gone in England now, but we offer diplomas and certificates and awards. We've also get involved directly with employers and look at their training schemes. And some employers want to get their own training schemes accredited with a quality mark. So we go in there and provide them with a framework to do that, some quality assurance, train their assessors, make sure that what they're doing is robust. And so they're the sort of models that we look at. It's not all qualifications. Sometimes it's the accreditation of company training schemes. And we do a lot of both, really. And the part of the mission of GQA, well, our sort of strapline is quality through qualifications, and that is where we see the future, because there's a whole variety of issues in the sector. Yes. When we were set up, so 20 years ago, there were quality issues in manufacturing, in systems companies where they design windows and put them together and so on. But they've largely gone now, because all their workforce are qualified and they've had structures in place and training programs, and the stuff we produce now in this country, the glass and the glazing systems are world class. They are as good as anything elsewhere in the world. Right. And the people who make them are as skilled and technically competent as anyone else in the world. So we've got that nailed. The problem we've got is that all these systems are then fitted by different installers up and down the country who are perhaps less qualified. So There's no regulation in terms of windows. Anybody can fit them, and doors, and the locking systems. There's no qualification. There's no requirement, no regulatory requirement for them to have a qualification or even a certificate or anything. So what we want to do is to work with the industry, work with partners, work with the government to try and change that, to ensure that there's somebody who fits a window in a house has had some training, has a qualification, has some competence that they can prove, and we think that's a good thing.
Oh, I absolutely, and I think I think everybody should know, in case they don't. You were very much involved with the development of the fenestration industry minimum technical competencies back in 2011. Now, did you think that that's almost 10 years ago now, isn't it? Did you think that the sector would be where it is now in terms of it remaining largely unregulated?
Not at all.
No, quite.
We thought that was the starting point, and when I first heard of minimum technical competence, I wasn't quite sure what they meant. And somebody explained it to me with an analogy, which I thought was quite useful. And what that was is it's somebody who takes a driving test. It was once explained to me with an analogy of the driving test. People have to sit the mandatory multi-choice test on the computer before they actually get into the car and complete the test on the road. And you wouldn't dream of letting that person who's just passed the multi-choice test become a qualified driver unless they've done something in the car first. So what they have to do is to sit with a qualified instructor for a period of time, then sit a test at the end of that in the car in real traffic situations with a qualified assessor who's the examiner, who makes a decision on whether that person's competent to drive or not. And they've already got the knowledge element ticked off, and then the examiner would check whether or not they've got the practical competency to actually drive. And are they going to be a liability to themselves? Are they going to be a liability to other road users? And then we've got a degree of assurance that that person's then competent. But if you look at the same with the glass sector, the minimum technical competencies provide them with that minimum sort of mandatory element at the start to say they're reasonably safe, and they understand a bit about the glass sector and what glazing is. But it doesn't mean they can fit a window. It just means that they've achieved that sort of entry level, and what they then need to do is work alongside instructors or other trained competent people to pick up those skills, to develop that competence themselves over a period of time, and then in a safe way where they can be put into safe situations and develop skills slowly and gradually. And over a period of time, they acquire the skills, and at the end of that, you could produce enough evidence to say, well, look, this person is now competent. They fitted, 10 windows there, or she's fitted 3 doors, or whatever it is. And you then know that they can do it competently. And you would get that work checked by a competent person. And that evidence will be checked by a qualified assessor who would make a decision on whether or not the volume and the credibility of the evidence was enough. And then you feel reasonably confident that that person could be let loose into the industry. And to me, there's no difference between that and somebody who's competent at driving. You've got to have those two elements, the knowledge bit and the competency bit, and the competency bit has to be assessed on the job.
Absolutely.
And the other thing about it is there's a consistency required across the country. England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales are diverging in terms of the skills regulations. So it's important to so the companies are working glass, they work across the borders already. And it's important for their staff to be competent in the same areas as they are in England, as they would be in Scotland. So if somebody fits a window in Scotland, it should be to the same standards as it is in England, and vice versa.
Right.
So that's where these national occupational standards come in. And these have been sort of languishing for a few years since UKCS dissolved. But GQA is actually working on some newer national standards now to update them a bit.
Absolutely.
The changes going on. So.
And I think, as you've said, the product can be as good as anything in the world, but if it's not put in properly, then it becomes rather a moot point in the first place.
And what's bizarre, I don't know, in government circles perhaps, is that the industry is seeking tighter regulation.
Yes.
I mean, the whole thrust of current government policies for deregulation, for companies know best and all the rest of it. But actually, what they want is to be regulated, because the big manufacturers are having all sorts of problems with goods, being coming back to them saying that this is a faulty window system, and it's not. It's either been fitted badly,
yes,
or it's the wrong system in the first place that was chosen. And it's not the manufacturer's fault that it's been badly surveyed, badly identified, installed, whatever. It's a perfectly good system. It's just that it was inappropriate or it was badly installed. But they get the comeback because the people who fitted it have long since gone. And they quite often the householder or the person who's bought the house don't know who's fitted it because there's no paperwork. Unlike gas, for example, the gas industry, the electrical sector, there's a paper trail to follow, so you can find out the actual name of the fitter who's done it. In glass, it's very different to that. So it's that tighter regulation helps the employers. It also lifts the whole sector out of this current perception that it's perhaps not as good as it could be. I mean, the old adages about used car salesmen or double glazing salesmen, that sort of thing. And we want to try and professionalise the industry and move away from that, so that people can be confident when they get somebody in who's advising them on window systems or installing them, that they're going to be competent, that what they tell them is correct and truthful, and so on.
And that's a strategy, of course, that will not only benefit the industry, the competent people in it, and indeed consumers as well. There's really very little people that lose out on having such a strategy.
It's win-win for everybody. The only people who lose out are those that don't wish to become qualified, don't wish to demonstrate the competence, or who want to undercut people because they take on staff who aren't properly trained and qualified and so on. So it's keeping the cowboys out of the industry. That's what we're after. And gas and heating and electrical contracting did that years ago. So we're following suit. I mean, there's a company out there called Corgi Fenestration that does this, that provides a Corgi accredited system where Corgi used to regulate the gas industry at one time, but it's the same system. It's UCAS approved, where they go in and they check what you're doing. And the people who fit the windows have to be qualified. They have to have a qualification, not just an MTC certificate. They have to be qualified. So, and that's to retain that Corgi Fenestration certificate. That's what. And we need more of this to go on. Corgi's just one scheme. There are others out there, but they all need to tie back to this requirement for qualification, because there's no other way of checking the competence.
Without a doubt.
Without that.
And I know, and we mentioned it earlier, but perhaps a bit more detail now. Mike, I know obviously GQA have been obviously continuing striving to bring the industry together in that sense. And I know you've already mentioned building our skills scheme, and I think a little more detail would be fantastic in how it's really coming along and going to really probably shape the future of much of the sector. And of course, with the new training centre in Sheffield as well, which I know the co-chairman of the review, Lord Blunkett, will be visiting at the end of the month. It's quite an exciting time, really, isn't it?
It is. It's a great time. I mean, I'm delighted that Lord Blunkett can fit us in to do the opening ceremony. I mean, Sheffield is his home patch anyway, so we're always on to a bit of a win there, I think. But when I met him in Parliament at the launch of the Parliamentary Review, it was... I did drop it in conversation then, so it wasn't a surprise when it came along. But yeah, that's great. I mean, that's because we've had a surplus. We've managed to acquire a building and fit it out with the latest window systems, door systems, and so on. And GQA isn't interested in doing any training. Our partners, our training providers, our employers, and so on, will be using that facility to actually train their own candidates. They'll be using our qualifications, obviously, but we're not actually getting involved in the training. It's just we needed to pump prime something and get something going, because there isn't anything like enough stuff out there in the training education sector. I used to be in charge of technology at a big college in St Helens, and we had no glass fitting, no window glazing systems at all that we could train people on. I mean, we had a really strong joinery section that could make sash windows and that sort of thing. But in terms of modern glazing, they didn't bifold doors, that sort of thing. They just didn't do it, and there wasn't space. And the technology changes so quickly that it's very quickly out of date. So it's difficult for colleges and private providers to keep up. You need to have a link in with the sector, with industry, who give you the products so you can train people on them. And that's where we saw the niche, really, where they're bringing employees together. And the Building Our Skills is this initiative to really promote the sector to schools and colleges, to training providers, to parents, and others. So there's another option for people who are interested in this sort of thing to take forward. A lot of people come into the industry, ex-builders, ex-joiners, ex-construction people who just develop these skills, but even they need to do a further period of qualification to become competent. So Building Our Skills is about that. And although it's primed by GQA and Inside the Box Marketing, we have brought in other players, other employers. We're now talking to the Glass and Glazing Federation, GGF, who run the Fencer scheme, and they're supportive of Building Our Skills, and they're the membership organisation for the sector. So we've got some big people in there, and there are other direct employers as well. And we've got we're trying to set up an ambassador scheme where there's people in each town that can go into schools and talk about the industry. And this is championed by one of our directors, John Ogilvie, who was from the industry. He's retired now from the industry, but he's only just retired, and he's got a lot of contacts. So he's driving that forward. He's quite evangelical about it. So we're lucky with that. And the other thing that we're doing is the big glass and glazing exhibition that takes place in the country is called the Fit Show. It takes place at the NEC in Birmingham. And GQA are essential to that now. We ran the skills competition there for the last few years, the Master Fit Challenge, and it's been sort of highlighted there, showcased there. We awarded the prizes there this year. The winners. So that's
fantastic.
It's a bit, and what I'd like to do is get that tied into the Skills Olympics and World Skills and all of that. But the infrastructure is not there yet. We need to have much more up and down the country so that we can get a really good pool of people to put together a team together. But the Master Fit Challenge and the Fit Show really are showcases for us. Yeah. And that has brought the industry together considerably. So Building Our Skills is just a natural extension of that.
It is, and sometimes, I have no doubt you felt, Mike, it's been a long and a hard slog, but clearly it's coming together in an exceptional way and in such a positive way. And perhaps it would be remiss of me, in fact, obviously we are as we speak, in the midst of a general election, so that's everybody's Christmas we're in. But what are your hopes, Mike, on that front? Given what you've just said, what would you like to see, perhaps, in the party manifestos regarding this?
Well, there's a few things. The obvious ones for me are the skills budgets for colleges and providers have been. I was going to say reduced. I would say ransacked might be a better word. The adult skills budget is virtually gone, replaced by learning loans. The infrastructure to develop qualifications and occupational standards has gone. The UKCS, the sector skills councils, and the sector's the standard setting bodies that used to get funded to maintain occupational standards and work with the sector and bring it together have largely gone. So, I mean, part of this was all austerity cuts where anything that wasn't core had to go. But in doing that, we have kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater. We did have a world-class skills system in this country. It's been copied across Europe and Asia and Africa and so on. And we've chosen to dismantle it. It's still in place in the developed nations, and we do work closely with the SGS up in Scotland and SEA in Northern Ireland and Qualification Wales. And they are maintaining the occupational standards, so I've got some projects with them to do that. And the Trailblazer sort of standards-based apprenticeship system in England should look at the occupational standards to make sure that they're aligned with them. But there is that lack of coherence. So in the party manifestos, I would like to see a bigger investment into skills, into the competence side, into supporting employers in getting their their workforce properly trained and competent. Employers are happy to pay for this. They just need something to buy. The government set a target at the start of this Parliament for 3 million new apprentices to be started during the term of it. I don't think they've even hit half of that. And part of the problem is that the employers are paying into the levy system, but they haven't got anything to buy. They've got all the money, but there's nothing in the shop. There's no apprenticeships available in glass sector. There just isn't one in the glass sector they can have in England now. There is in Scotland and Wales, Northern Ireland, not in England, because that's gone. So we are struggling a bit, I think. And it's, the intention was there at the start of the last Parliament, but they pulled the rug out from under our feet at the start of it, so we couldn't actually train people. But it just needs thinking through coherently.
And I think you're echoing the thoughts of so many in so many different sectors on that front. And well, I suppose at this point, only time will tell, and there's not much time left. In fact, now speaking of time, I'm conscious of the fact that we're drawing to the end of ours. But before, of course, we conclude things too formally. You mentioned right at the beginning, Mike, you were approaching the end of your 5-yearly strategy review. As that does draw to a close, what reflections, not only maybe specifics in terms of what it is you've been doing on it, but what reflections have you come to personally as GQA moves forwards?
Well, there's quite a few. I mean, really what we've looked at, when I've looked back, I thought we had a period in time where we're becoming consolidated and stabilised. Then we had the last period where we've sort of expanded and grown. So really our future now is to really start making a difference into the sector, to develop building our skills as a brand that's not owned by GQA, that's owned by the industry, that's got some sort of board there with a strong employer representation, not-for-profit company probably. And we also want to look at how we develop the occupational standards in the country, and we need a better, stronger system for that. So we are going to look at that in the future. We also want to replicate this training centre we're developing in Sheffield across the country. We already have some learning pods in about 5 different locations, where just smaller versions really, where people can do a bit of training on. But we want to develop more of them so that the industry becomes accessible to people in most areas in the country. So we're looking at perhaps set them up in the North East next, because there's a bit of a gap in the geography there in the country. So there's things like that. We also have just acquired another awarding body called PAA EQ-SET, which deals with the science sector and the nuclear sector and meteorological sector, as well as quite a few others, some of the food manufacturing sector as well. But we like them because they're very sort of niche, they're very specialised, and they work directly with employers. And they've been forming in the same way that GQA has. They just by responding to employers' needs, they've just got products and services that actually meet them. So although all their qualification tends to be delivered by third parties, training providers, colleges, and so on.
Well, it's going to be an exceptionally busy few months for you going forward, Mike. It'll be a marvellous visit from Lord Blunkett. I very much hope that we can speak again very soon in the new year, when there'll be so much more to discuss as well, not least a little bit more political certainty as to what's going to be happening to the sector. But for now, Mike, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for your time, Jonathan.
Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Mike, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at GQA are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for the Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you will enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without making amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40-odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, well, no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then to introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your constituents right now? Hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I've found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership. Well,
I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you'll know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
You're echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said. What some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. And I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to us. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story. Most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder visitors, and they always used to kind of, you see their eyes going up and thinking, who, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Bunk was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastic new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was your proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Triple Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress that since, of course, you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress it. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old males cycling to evensong and warband. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting. to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I've got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
Very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working with and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death counts. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important. People do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine it will actually very content and happy. The former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you quite unscathed from it.
I can't. He was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out 1 or 2 of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time. I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years. And it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle, those that have been left behind by our economic progress. And it would be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know there's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Well, Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Adam and Eve to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.